that we have written consent for the use of the name. I've asked for that we suggest a different name, that we have other more appropriate names be used. All that got turned down. They found the name Mushkegowuk to be alarming. They found the use of the name Mushkegowuk to describe the riding. So it's not just the name that offended them, that they weren't asked. It's how they describe this riding as Mushkegowuk. I felt, and our party felt, that our amendment leaves room for consultation to happen properly, what they asked for, without the name Mushkegowuk being forwarded as one of the proposed names. That's what we should have done. That would have been the right thing to do. I want to go back to the consultation process because my notes, again, Speaker, my notes are all over the page here. I was writing as fast as I could during the live consultations in Moose Factory. They asked us to give serious, I'm quoting, serious consideration to go back to the drawing board. They said, this is not what you're doing, this is not reconciliation. This is, quote, we know what's best for you. And I think we all should have come away from there, Speaker, fully understanding how they felt. There should have been no question that they didn't want that name there, they don't want it part of it. It doesn't represent properly the area that that riding will be. Now, in terms of the consultation process, and again, this goes back to the Grand Chiefs, go back to them with a clean slate, a clear slate, no preconceived ideas. I think one of the members called it a temporary placeholder. They want to go back with a temporary placeholder. We know what's going to happen with that. A permanent name was not developed, so the Liberals are proposing one, making one up. That's exactly what the First Nations asked not to happen. Instead, our amendment was to propose to go back with a clean slate. And I'm going to offer yet another interpretation and another quote from the Grand Chiefs. They tell us, and I'm quoting again, there was, quote, no consent, quote, to use the name. They went so far as to say, quote, it's disrespectful to use the name, and I'm quoting from them, and that, quote, you are taking, quote, taking their name. That's how they felt, Speaker. You're taking their name. So to go back to them with the same option as before, albeit now expanded, is the same insult that they perceived the first time. This option that we brought removes that slight, and it honors what the Grand Chiefs and the Chiefs were asking for. Speaker, there's time. There's time to fix this and to do it right. In fact, there's so much time that, again, Grand Chief Jonathan Solomon said they would rather wait it out another 4 years and go back to the drawing board than to have this riding proceed. They would rather it not proceed. They want real consultations. that take place in the Mushkegowuk territory, and that a riding be considered and implemented which respects their wishes and their thoughts. Speaker, I don't know what happened between the flight from Moosonee back to Toronto, but something along that flight changed, because it was the end of the week 2 weeks ago. We flew back. I thought, yep, we got it. We got this. We hear you. Boy, you couldn't have said it any better. We get it. You don't want that. We understand why you don't want that. We understand you feel slighted. Certainly from everything you've told us, you have been slighted. And we got this. Don't worry. We're going to bring amendments that are going to, we'll fix this. We'll fix this. And the amendment that came was, I think I heard one of the third party use gobsmacked this morning in question period. Well, I can tell you I was gobsmacked when I looked at these amendments and read that first one. I thought, what the heck just happened? Were you not at the same hearings we were at? How can this be? How can this happen? If the riding we end up with was indeed the actual territory of the Mushkegowuk, I'm pretty certain, Speaker, they would have been happy to have it called that, even though they weren't consulted in advance, if the actual riding represented that name. You could see that it would make some sense. But what they're saying, and why they don't offer an alternative, is because Grand Chief Fiddler and Grand Chief Solomon's letter to us on page 7, item 5, lastly, but significantly, is the name of one of the proposed new ridings in the James Bay region. The FNEBC has recommended that this be named Mushkegowuk. This is in their letter now. They're saying this was done without consultation or permission from the Mushkegowuk Council, NAN, and the First Nations in this territory. Naming this riding, they call it the PED, naming this riding Mushkegowuk is misleading, as the government's own statistics indicate that the majority of the population would be Francophone, not Indigenous. This highly, I think they mean this is highly inappropriate and may cause significant confusion with the political interests of the Mushkegowuk Council. So it's clear why they're offended. It's plain as day. They said it was an ambitious schedule. In May, when they first met, they said we'll talk again for feedback, but never again were they consulted. They said they have concerns about confusion. Calling the riding Mushkegowuk is not what it means. It is not a riding of Mushkegowuk. It includes Hearst, Kapuskasing, and other communities, far, far, far from the coast. They're south and they're west. Considerable distance, a long flight. There was no consent, is what they said. These are my notes that I took down now. They said it was disrespectful and that we're taking their name. Wow. I don't think you would have to clarify any further, Speaker, what the heck they're saying, because it's pretty darn clear. They're looking for reasons why there was no alternatives put forward. And Speaker, they were thoughtful, respectful. They made very succinct presentations. They all left there with the understanding that we got it. We understood what they were talking about. And here we are at the 11th hour now, and we're back to where we started, but maybe just a little bit worse. So, Speaker, you have to ask yourself, and you have to wonder why. We were all in the same meeting. We saw the passion that the Grand Chiefs and the Chiefs spoke with, and they were passionate. Man, they were offended. They had a lot of passion, and you can feel their history coming through in every word they said. They told us how insulted they were, and you had to feel for that, Speaker. You had to understand how insulted they were and why. They were very clear about the why. They put together a very succinct presentation. And I believed that the government was going to go right back to Toronto and whip up an amendment that says, yep, boy, didn't mean to, but we'll fix this. And instead, it boggles my mind, Speaker, that we ended up with a chance to not insult them and acknowledge that we listened to what they said, and instead we're going to see this legislature ignore it and go back. We went right back at them with the same thing. I can only imagine their eyes rolling when they saw this latest. They must have looked at each other and said, were we in a different room? Why were they nodding? Did they not understand what we were saying? Because I'm telling you, we understood and crafted our amendment as such. So, Speaker, needless to say, here we are. Amendments done. Various ones were carried, and this one is moved around, and this one was amended. And next thing you know, one was withdrawn, another one was out of order. At the end of the day, Speaker, we're back to not the riding of Mushkegowuk, but now we have the riding of Mushkegowuk-James Bay, which is equally confusing, equally insulting, and equally disrespectful of all of the people that made presentations to us. They talked about the various examples from around the country when we talk about representation by population. That's what we learned in school as kids, rep by pop. That's what we learned. So we know that in Ontario, ridings are around 100,000 each. That's why we have redistribution every so often to try to realign these ridings that better reflect the population, especially in the faster-growing urban centres. That's why we're adding, for the most part, urban centres, 15 ridings for the June 7th, 2018 election. We know, Speaker, that that's not just the only thing that needs to be taken into account. Population, yes, it's critical, especially in the urban centres, but in the north, and in rural Ontario for that matter, and especially in the far north, these ridings are big. They're vast areas of geography that take a tremendous amount of time to get from one end to the other, and quite frankly, it's not fair. It may be represented accurately by geography or by population, but not by geography, Speaker. So the idea to divvy up the two ridings into 4 is solid. I know in my riding of Nipissing, I can get from one end to the other in about 2 hours. That's how long it would take me to go from end to end. Maybe a little longer, depending on if it's in the winter. I have a riding of about 85, approximately 1,000 people. So I'm smaller than other ridings who are in the average of 100,000. But I don't know how you would add to it without adding to the geography and the time it would take. So we look at the northeast and the northwest ridings, and I've heard from some of the members in the far north that it could take a dozen or more hours, in some cases far more than that, to get from end to end. You really can't even do it in a day. And yet we have ridings in the GTA that, some could take you a dozen minutes to get from end to end. There's 20 or 30 of the MPPs here who have one mayor. In our northern ridings, I know in my riding of Nipissing, I have 11 mayors. I have 11 mayors that I meet with. That's what comprise my riding. 1 in North Bay and 10 rural mayors. I know I had the 10 rural mayors invited to my home this summer, barbecue and a day-long session, and Patty put on dinner for us after as well. It's a good opportunity to talk, and we talk a lot. Well, we talked about very specific things about what we need in terms of infrastructure and whatnot, but we also talk about how we're represented and how we're thought of in Southern Ontario. And I'm a small riding by northern comparisons. Mine's a couple hours from end to end. So we can understand that it can't always be by population, that we are looking at geography as being an integral part of it. So that's why we're going to end up with, in the Northeast, a couple of ridings, one that's just the city of Timmins, 45,000 or so, and this other riding that I'd like to say yet to be named riding, but I guess the Liberals have their way. It's going to be the riding of Mushkegowuk-James Bay, as inappropriate as that is. That'll be about 37,000, something along that line. Some people would say, well, come on, that's not right. You've got a small amount of people representing, being represented by one person, and others have to have 100,000. That just doesn't make any sense. But I know that the chiefs talked about the PEI example, where I think it's 4 seats for a small area. I mean, Sudbury, you can fit PEI into Sudbury 14 times. Just the city's greater Sudbury. 14 times the size of PEI. It's just Sudbury. It's pretty interesting when you think about these things. When you look at the size of Northern Ontario, there's 880,000 men and women that live there, kids, seniors, 880,000 people, and it's vast. It takes a long, long time to get from end to end. And so this is a solution to bring truer representation to areas that are tougher to get to. So we can see why. We can see why Chief Faries from Moose Creek First Nation, she was very well spoken, came from the private sector, she was a criminal lawyer, she's been chief 2 times. She talked about the alarming use of the name Mushkegowuk and how that doesn't, having that as the name of the riding doesn't mean anything to them. They weren't consulted. They hadn't seen any maps of the riding since all of this came about. She talked about the poverty. She talked about the poverty, Speaker, and we heard our member from Sault Ste. Marie talk about third world conditions this morning. Well, she talked about that. Those were her words as well. There's third world conditions. And that's such an important message to bring to Queen's Park. I'm really glad everybody traveled to Moosonee. You got to meet some great people, crossed over to Moose Factory, a great chance to chat with the operator of the boat. You get to see a little bit of the north and the beauty of the north, because it was a spectacular day. It was 17 degrees. It was a beautiful sunny day. but they have food insecurity, economic instability, higher unemployment, high drug overdose rates, high suicide rates. This is why they are looking for a representative to be here specifically on their issues.